As many of you already know, PRIZM is EA's pioneering segmentation system that classifies Canada's neighborhoods into unique lifestyle types, assigned at a 6-digit postal code or dissemination area level. PRIZM integrates the latest data from nearly a dozen demographic, financial, psychographic, and geographic sources, providing an authoritative foundation for businesses, governments, and not-for-profits to analyze consumers and markets. Sorry, just waiting for this to catch up. There we go. So why did we choose to rebuild now? Our last version was developed based on the 2011 Census and National Household Survey and was released in 2015. We have updated PRIZM annually to reflect new demographic and survey data. Typically, our segmentation systems are rebuilt every 10 years, which is generally the time it takes for new neighborhoods to undergo sufficient transformation. We chose to rebuild a new PRIZM for 2020 because of the challenges that were caused by the 2011 National Household Survey. We're happy that we did. Some things about new PRIZM have changed, such as the number and composition of the segments. Danny will be talking about all of these changes very shortly. However, we have kept other elements of PRIZM consistent, such as the continued use of descriptive icons for each of the 67 segments. Each element of the icon helps describe the segment it represents, from the segment number in the top left that references the segment's socioeconomic status to the alphanumeric life stage reference in the bottom right. And of course, no PRIZM icon would be complete without the catchy segment names developed by Michael Weiss, who incidentally has been involved in naming PRIZM segments since the mid-1990s, and the evocative artwork of our fabulous artist-in-residence, Risto Turunen. But most important of all about PRIZM is the fact that it can help organizations across every industry sector answer some critical questions to address key business challenges. Who are my best customers, and where do I have new and emerging opportunities? Which segments are found within my trade area? What are the best channels to reach these subsets of consumers or citizens? And very topically, how has the PRIZM profile of my customers changed pre versus post COVID-19? These are just a handful of the questions where PRIZM can provide quick and comprehensive insight at a granular geographic area to inform everything from marketing strategy and site location to merchandising and campaign execution. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Danny Human, our chief geek. Danny has led the development of 4 PRIZM versions for Environics Analytics. His expertise and experience with the data, statistical methods, and testing are really the secret sauce behind PRIZM. Danny, over to you.
Thanks, Evan. The purpose of PRIZM is to organize neighborhoods using the best sources of data, and we partner with the best of breed data partners in Canada. Demographic data come from the census and EA's 2020 demo stats. Psychographic data come from social values produced by our sister firm, Environics Research. We sprinkle financial data from Equifax and geographic data to build our proximity to cities and urbanity concepts come from TomTom. We take all these data and build into the system to classify all neighborhoods in Canada. We then link and evaluate these data using behavioral data capturing shopping, leisure, media consumption, and motivators for how and where we choose to live, shop, and go about our daily lives. We begin the process by reviewing all the data that can be fed into the segmentation process. We carefully select the major themes we need to reflect in these segments, like age, income, occupation, and household formation, and then select variables that best reflect them. Based on our extensive experience, we develop and assign weights to these themes, putting greater emphasis on key themes that we are interested in. We run it through the clustering algorithms and have the ability to create near instant reports, maps, and graphs showing the key metrics we report on. Based on what we see, we go back and release and adjust the variables and weights. What makes PRIZM good is the careful attention we place on selecting the right set of variables and a clustering algorithm that fits our needs in the data. There's an art and science to selecting variables, and we need to ensure that what is selected is logical and effective, and that we don't have too many variables capturing the same thing. We chose the K-mediums clustering algorithm as it's less influenced by extreme outliers and it minimizes the absolute deviations, both critical considerations when analyzing Canada, a country with extreme income differences in geography, from core, dense, urban large cities to rural northern communities, and wide age ranges, including maintainers less than 20 years old up to 85 plus. We run hundreds of solutions and test against real data. We can see what works and evaluate every solution. We don't define the segments ahead of time and search for them. We let the data speak and let the clusters emerge naturally. We're looking for the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and a good solution shows differentiation of behaviors between consumer groups and across a broad range of products and services. It's not an easy job, as there's lots of data to sift through, lots of testing and lots of refinement. But at some point, one or two solutions stand out and are developed further. Once the clusters have been finalized and all the postal codes are assigned a segment, we begin to profile and describe them. Some even say we bring them to life. As Evan said, we are fortunate to have both Michael Weiss and Riso Turnan, both professionals and experts in their fields, help us describe these segments through both words and illustrations. So, as you heard, PRIZM has 67 segments, capturing all aspects of Canadian life. Nearly all have new names and write-ups. There are 14 segments that are Francophone, the population that primarily speak French at home. The 14 segments cross all income levels and can be found in all 5 urbanity classes. We have 19 diverse segments. These still exist. There still exist segments that describe the Asian and South Asian populations. And there are segments that now capture the increasing diversity of Canada's mid-sized and large cities beyond the big cities of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. In fact, 2 of the segments are both Francophone and diverse, with large populations of immigrants from countries like Syria, Haiti, and Vietnam. These 4 segments are so close to the previous version of PRIZM that we felt we could carry forward the name. These are Asian Sophisticates, Asian Avenues, South Asian Society, and Enclave Multi-Ethnique. One of the big changes that we've seen is the emergence of what we call the urban fringe. This urban fringe, found only in the major cities of Canada, is located between the downtown core and suburbia. Even though it's found in a few large cities, the behaviors of these households, how they live, their house prices and incomes, and what they do is different. The 9 segments here spend a lot of money, and they capture a different kind of contemporary urban lifestyle. Once consisting of large families, the children have moved out, leaving empty nesters and some young up-and-comers. We thought about this as it meant ex-urban was gone. We don't want to change the schema on you, but we thought it was important to capture this so you can understand there are many opportunities in this market. These maps illustrate where the urban fringe can be found. Urban is colored in red, followed by urban fringe in yellow and suburban in orange. In total, 12% of Canadian households are located in this urban fringe geography. We know that 67 segments are a lot, so we've continued with social groups and life stages. There are 20 social groups that factor in urbanity, income, age, and diversity. We have simplified our life stages and now have 8 in total, split into younger years, family life, and mature years. Now I'm going to turn it over to Doug Norris, who really needs no introduction to you. Formerly head of the Census of Canada and our chief demographer, Doug played an essential role in designing and personifying these new segments, ensuring that we captured the essence of demographic change, on the ground as we say, so that you can better understand and leverage these differences and shifts in population through the PRIZM system. Doug is going to highlight how this new system captures some key trends. Doug?
Thank you, Danny, and good afternoon, everyone. As Danny has mentioned and described the creation of our new PRIZM system and the 67 very diverse segments that reflect the changing demographic and social makeup of Canada. What I'd like to do in the next few minutes is point out how the new PRIZM segments reflect some of the groups that marketers are often interested. In particular, I want to talk about the three big generations, the boomers, Gen Xers, and the millennials. And I'll also touch on the multi-ethnic population. So first of all, let's look at the older households in Canada. Clearly, the older population has been growing very rapidly, and it's not surprising that in the new PRIZM, we see many more segments which have older population and older households. In fact, when I looked through the 67 segments, I found 32 segments actually had more than a half of their households made up of maintainers aged 55 and over. And this group is an increasingly important economic force. I estimate they account for about 40% of all expenditures in Canada. But they're a very diverse group. On the one extreme, we find them in all parts of the country, certainly in rural areas, in urban areas, in suburban areas, and in the new urban fringe that Danny mentioned. But they're very diverse in many different ways. For example, their socioeconomic makeup. On the one hand, if we were to look at the younger, what can I call them, the younger older segments, mainly younger boomers in families, often with dual earners, older children living at home, and pretty good incomes. For example, there's segment 7, mature and secure. And in fact, if you look at the top 10 segments, about 8 of them fall into this class of what I'd call the young older segment. At the other extreme, we have much older households made up of a very different mix. In general, many empty nest couples, very few children, and many individuals living on their own in one-person household. In fact, there are 3 of our segments that have about 60% of all households made up of a one-person household. Clearly, a very different demographic and many different needs compared to the mature and secure segment. And then we find a new segment for the first time reflecting the recent trends in retirement. We called it scenic retirement, segment 21. And this reflects retirees who decide to move out from the urban areas, the large urban areas, and settle in scenic areas such as Niagara-on-the-Lake, the Okanagan Valley out in BC, the Kelowna area, and other similar areas. So that stands out for the first time as something I think we'll see more of. The next segment, the next group I want to talk about are Gen Xers. Often we don't talk very much about Gen Xers. It's a smaller segment compared to the boomers and to millennials, but even though they're not as highly concentrated, I did find about 6 of the segments that reflect a high concentration, relatively speaking, of Gen Xers, perhaps mixed in with some younger boomers or some older millennials. And again, we see a real diversity right across the country. Here I show you 3 of the segments, 3 of the 6 segments, multicultural-ish, a well-off segment in suburbia. In Quebec, a very similar segment, vie de rêve. And in smaller urban areas, family modern. So these segments, clearly an important economic force today. They're in their high income areas, raising families, many with teens. The next group we'll look at are the millennials, who certainly have received considerable attention from marketers over the past decade. Millennials today are aged 25 to 40, and I consider them very much a group still in transition. And so we see the diversity reflected in the PRIZM segments. On the one hand, we see some older millennials that have married, have children, have purchased homes, and are living comfortably in the suburbs. So segment 11, Modern suburbia is an example of this. On the other hand, many of the millennial segments are found in the larger urban areas. And one example of a group, Eat, Play, Love, segment 12, mostly singles, perhaps some couples, but very few children, living in condos, mostly in downtown Toronto and Vancouver, with fairly substantial incomes, even though they're mostly starting off their careers. There's another similar segment in the urban fringe area, places like Markham that probably are close to high-tech industry and also living in condos. At the other extreme, in some of the smaller urban areas, we find millennials which have much lower levels of education, much lower levels of income, and perhaps are vulnerable, both financially and in today's economic situation in particular. An example is segment 52, friends and roomies. And finally, the group is cultural diversity. Canada, as you know, has a high level of immigration, and so that is fueling an increased cultural diversity, not only in our largest cities, but diversity is starting to spread out. We see diversity also fueled by not only immigrants, but by their children. Children of immigrants who came to Canada 20 and 30 years ago, who are now in their 20s and 30s, starting to form families and purchase homes on their own. And again, we see quite a diversity within the culturally diverse segments. Some of the segments are dominated by a single group. For example, we have 2 South Asian segments. We have 4 segments that have a moderately high concentration of the Chinese and other Asian populations. But we also see segments, example being Metro Melting Pot, that is real, what I would refer to as a diversity within the diversity, immigrants from many different countries around the world. And finally, we see examples of how immigration is spreading out. In smaller areas, starting to see higher concentrations, nowhere near the levels of Toronto and Vancouver, but noticeably high concentrations of newcomers and of their children. An example, Diversité Nouvelle, a segment in Quebec that for the first time is seen in the suburbs of Montreal rather than in the downtown. There's another segment downtown Montreal, but this is a suburban Montreal community with high diversity, mostly on the South Shore in the Brossard area and also up north in Laval. So the new PRIZM really does identify many of the distinctions, I think, that are important for marketers when they look at marketing to either one of the generational groups or the various cultural groups. And with that, I'll turn it over to Evan, who's going to chair a panel of people using PRIZM. Evan?
Thanks very much, Doug. Some excellent demographic insights and trends and how those have been incorporated into PRIZM. So thank you very much. And now on to our guest panel, who are going to answer some important questions about PRIZM, how it helps them, and why this update is important. Please join me in welcoming Jim Driscoll, Director of Category Management from Carlton Cards, Matt Ball, Vice President of Strategy at Wunderman Thompson, the agency, and John Howling, Director, Data, Analytics, and Visualization Services for York Region. Thank you again, panelists, for joining us today. So I'm going to start off with some fairly broad questions and then see then about how we can narrow the funnel and get to a little bit more sector specific. But just to start things off, John, can I ask you to comment? How has PRIZM as a segmentation system and a lens to be able to look at consumers in a more granular way, how has that helped with what you're doing in York Region?
Thanks for the question. Well, it allows us to get a more complete picture of who our target audiences are and what they need. Something we've been working on is our digital strategy and customer experience plan. We needed to better understand what services we could make digital or offer digitally. So what we wanted to do is know, actually, is who would use those digital services? What would the uptake be? What would be the barriers that might exist when making things digital? So we were able to use PRIZM and our Access York data, which is basically our call center data, to build out different target groups with digitalization in mind to get a better, clear, and much clearer picture. We now have a better understanding of which services to focus our digitalization efforts on and how we can build things that will benefit our residents. We also have used it for media. So we were using print a lot, and through PRIZM, we found that we would be better off going to ads, let's say on the GO train and stuff. So that's how we have used it. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. That's great. Jim, you know, you're in a unique business with Carlton Cards in that, you know, you're selling a lot of your product through, you know, retailers, and so you don't always have a very clear picture necessarily of who's buying your cards. How has PRIZM helped in that capacity?
Well, thanks, Evan. It's important to us to really do a great job for our retailers that we supply, and as a result, we want to make sure that we have the right mix of product and the right cards. So our Papyrus line of cards is a perfect example. We know that that product sells really well to people who have a higher income, higher education, and are younger. However, that wasn't enough, and so using PRIZM, we were able to look really and say, you know, there are about 8 or 9 segments where that product really, really does well. So if we take a retailer and we take its postal code, then we can map an area around that and say, you know, what PRIZM clusters are popping up here. And if we find out that they're the great ones that we really need, that helps us make decisions on which products we should put in and be more successful for those retailers.
Fantastic, thanks. So really understanding the trade area and who those consumers are that populate that trade area around a particular location. That's great. Okay, and I'll turn it over to Matt now to round things out. Matt, bringing, you know, I guess a fairly unique perspective in that you're working from an agency and working across different clients, including several of our clients. How has PRIZM, from your perspective, Matt, helped inform the creative process or communications generally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest thing for us is that kind of difference between a design target and a consumption target. So, you know, we'll often talk about a product or a brand in terms of the aspirational, who are we thinking when we design the communication. What PRIZM has kind of opened our eyes to and allowed us to do is make sure that that's complementary to people that are actually feasibly going to buy the product. So going beyond kind of just a more superficial psychographic definition of who we'd like to design for, to more of a tangible, and I know the words on the ground have been used a few times today, but a very tangible and actionable definition of the target that we can make sure there's some business upside to target.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just switching gears a little bit and trying to, again, looking at points of differentiation now that you've described a little bit about how you're using it, but I'm going to turn this one over back to Jim and say, so has PRIZM enabled you to do anything differently or that you weren't actually able to do before?
It definitely has. One of the great things that we can do with PRIZM as well is we could take some of our own data. So we had done some of our own research as well into greeting card consumers. And because we had that information at a postal code level, we were able to marry that data with the PRIZM data to create some custom clusters for ourselves for greeting card consumers. And it really helped us pinpoint stores where we definitely know that greeting card consumers that we call the heavy connectors, our best customers, where they shop. And once we knew that they shopped in that area, it does help us with our retailers in expanding our footprint and making sure that they understand how important our category is to that store. That's something we couldn't do before. Before, we might have been able to say, if it was a higher income area, we can get much more granular now with what we can offer.
Fantastic. Matt, back to you. Just do you have something with respect to how PRIZM has enabled you to look at things a little bit differently or approach client initiatives and some of their communication strategy differently?
Yeah, sure. And I should say we're kind of in the early days of the relationship, just at the start of the year. But I think a couple of like really eye-opening moments for me so far have been the own data part. So when we started looking at the actual consumption of the products we were talking about, and B, how that maps across the country depending on the dealership. So I work with Mazda and Automotive, and understanding how those segments differ by dealerships starts to really open up a lot of opportunity in terms of how like the physical location of the dealerships might alter some nuances to how we communicate in not just regions, but even micro regions.
Great, thank you. So we've talked about how PRIZM can really allow businesses and not-for-profits and governments to really understand populations at the neighborhood level. It's got that granularity and that sort of actionability, Matt, as you talked about. So as each of you in your respective sectors are preparing for the recovery, sort of as the restrictions loosen, as hopefully COVID fades into the background, how important do you see PRIZM being as part of your organization's efforts to inform a lot of the decision making that has to happen? So I'm going to ask John to go first to bring that municipal, that government level perspective.
Sure, thank you. Well, PRIZM and the suite of Environics Analytics products such as Demostats, Community Health, and Mobilescapes are all proving to be very useful in our recovery planning. The more data around economic and health recovery we can get our hands on, the better. And having more granular data allows us to personalize services. Obviously, governments aren't going to have the amount of money they had previously, and we have to understand our customers better and make sure that our services and our programs are have the best impact and value for our dollar. So by supporting residents and businesses with the right services and programs at the right time, and data is key in helping prevent and slow any potential future outbreaks as well with economic recovery of the region. So we're working on sort of an economic recovery dashboard, and we're using a lot of this data in order to start understanding, which businesses are open, who do we need to get to, those sorts of things. So yeah, it's been, I mean, we're in the thick of it right now, as you can well imagine, and these are very busy days with our municipal response to the crisis that we're having right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. How do you see this helping clients as they struggle to put those recovery plans together and go back to market, particularly in a communications, advertising, et cetera context?
Yeah, I think the biggest realization and kind of lesson I've learned personally as well through all of this, we all became the target market almost overnight when we stopped working in the offices, and a lot of the decision making, I think, became quite emotional just in general, especially with communications. You saw a lot of kind of initial responses that were as much, I think, people wanting to make things that made themselves feel better as perhaps the right thing to do. We can debate that. But, I think what Environics is allowing us to do is have a lot of evidence that's a little bit more fact-based. So we can temper some of those discussions with, what's actually happening in Canada versus what we might think or feel is happening in Canada. So, I think what we appreciate is just that kind of sometimes cold splash of water in the face to say, what's real in your area? That's So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Jim?
Well, as you can imagine, people are social distancing and staying away from right now, but they still want to have social connections with each other. So that's what our category does. Greeting cards help people stay connected. However, people are a little apprehensive perhaps to be getting out and buying them in person right now. So as we come through the other side of this, it's going to be really important for us to remind people why they want to connect with others in the first place. And we actually expect some people are going to say they missed those connections and maybe get out and actually buy some more greeting cards. So we're going to have to market to those places that were affected the most, I think, at a higher level than some of the other areas. So I think using PRIZM will help us understand where we should tailor our marketing efforts and who we should be approaching from an audience standpoint to really make sure we get those messages out.
Absolutely. There's a real opportunity there to see who's sort of moving at what pace, once the restrictions loosen up, and which segments are coming out faster or slower, and does that actually mirror what happened before, COVID? So it'll be interesting to do that kind of analysis. Well, thank you. On that note, I really appreciate your time here and being part of our panel today. Sharing your use cases and insight into the challenges you're facing helps us all understand how to employ PRIZM in the analytic strategies and in light of new consumer behaviors and in the efforts towards economic recovery. So thank you very much. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our founder, Jan Kessel, who has been involved in many aspects of the design and development of our segmentation systems for Canada over the years, and who will help wrap up our presentation. Jan?
Thanks, Evan, and thank you very much to Jim, Matt, and John for sharing your experiences with PRIZM. It's great for us to hear what you've been doing and the challenges that you're facing. Well, I guess it's no secret for those of you who know me that I love PRIZM. After all these years, I'm still an advocate for this kind of commercial off-the-shelf geographic-based segmentation tool. Sometimes we still get the question, with so much data out there, why would we use something like PRIZM? Our team has outlined a lot of the reasons of why it's an important tool for understanding consumers and citizens. And I want to talk to you about two additional themes of why PRIZM is so valuable. These relate to the role of PRIZM in integrating data for insights and for action. I also want to emphasize for us that the development and use of PRIZM is a partnership game. Canada is a small market, not room for everyone to do everything. And we've got many great sources of data from partners, data that they collect that provide insights into consumers and markets. We've got an example here on the screen of all the disparate data sources that are out there: demographics, psychographics, spending information, health status, employment, automotive information. All of these pieces of data are very important to understanding consumers. And the analysts in your organization just don't have time to source all of that data, integrate it, put it together in a way that you can use it. We used to hear that half of the time that was spent on an analytics project was spent on gathering data. In addition to that, once these databases are assembled, we have to model data that are collected from surveys and might be available for Canada and the provinces and the markets. We model it down to the postal code or the neighborhood. We link databases together. We combine the data that we produce with other data in order to provide a 360-degree view of the customer. And PRIZM is at the center of that. We have 100 data scientists, analysts, geographers, economists, mathematicians, and statisticians who are guided by another 100 experts in business and industry strategy and marketing and location applications. And we have technologists. And we do that in order to bring all of these databases together. We used to say as our tagline, we love data, so you don't have to. Well, no, everyone loves data. It's the in thing. But we worry about the best methodologies for bringing all of the best data in Canada together so that it's there for you when you want to use it in projects, in your own modeling and insights organizations, or from within our Envision tool. PRIZM becomes the lingua franca through which you can look at the characteristics, the behaviors, and attitudes of custom segments that have been developed by combining your segments, by combining your data and your knowledge with PRIZM. It's adding PRIZM into the mix of customer data and external data that enables you to create a way to understand messaging, product preferences, how to get the right message to the right people at the right time, and using the right medium, the media that they prefer. We're very grateful and proud of the partnerships that we've developed over the past 17 years since our founding with survey companies, media measurement organizations, and other data aggregators and compilers, so that by putting this whole framework together, we can produce 30,000 variables for the 800,000 postal codes of Canada, updated regularly, combining our flagship products like PRIZM, Demostats, and Wellscapes with our geo-modeled or value-added versions of the data that are provided by others. This results in an integrated, comprehensive database about Canadians, integrated for insights, so you can have a comprehensive view of your customers and the markets that you're operating in. In the last 2 years, we've taken this further, addressing how we can be sure that these insights can be used precisely in your executions, so that the investments that you've made in understanding your customers and gaining personas and understanding their media preferences and their attitudes and their behaviors, how you can take that the last mile and include it in your activation and execution programs. This slide really demonstrates the extent to which we've extended that network of partnerships for activation and execution. Through the over 40 partners that are shown on this slide, we can put your analytics and insight into action. Data-driven decision-making leading to data-driven execution. We want PRIZM and the rest of our EA data to be the intel inside for your programs. That's why we've extended our partner network to include so many organizations that you rely on. We've partnered with new players and have empowered them, and also our traditional media partners in order to execute against the work that we do for you. So from the print media space, traditional TV and radio, and now specialty TV, through digital out of home, digital and mobile and social platforms, and consulting groups and media planners, both software providers and the agencies, the direct marketing partners, email partners, and the market research partners, all of whom help you understand your customers and execute. These are the partners that we've now provided PRIZM and our other data to, so that you can actually execute against a target and be precise about that to get the right results based on your insight. I think I need to go. Sorry, Julia, you'll have to move my slide. It's not, I'm sorry, everybody it's just not moving and fast enough. So please move to the next section. Thank you. The last thing I want to touch on is this unprecedented situation that we face and that some of the panelists discussed, where many businesses are struggling and where we are as Canadians. We're juggling our desire to get out to work and socialize and shop at the same time as making sure that we're dealing with health concerns and doing it safely. What we're working on are how we can help with data so that that recovery and response is done safely and done with the benefit of understanding at a very fine area, focus on areas and geography. And also, how can we look through the lens of this new PRIZM system to understand the differences between different groups of consumers and how they're thinking about it. So for example, we've produced a index, a financial vulnerability index, and we've looked at that through the lens of the new PRIZM, where we understand that people who we would consider vulnerable now in view of COVID are not necessarily just that lower socioeconomic status, but maybe people who are more leveraged or who don't have as much resource in order to deal with the new situation they find themselves in. And so it's a new concept of financial vulnerability. And using that combined with PRIZM, we're going to make those tools available as businesses start to emerge from the pandemic and people are beginning to go back to stores, back to restaurants, back to work, but hopefully in a safe way. We've also looked at social vulnerability, where we've looked at people's own self-described level of sort of mental stress, people who are not really grounded in their community and don't feel like they can reach out to their neighbors and ask for help. This kind of social vulnerability is going to lead to different behaviors, and we can see those kinds of different levels of social vulnerability with different index levels through the different PRIZM segments. This is a quick look at the social vulnerability index that we previously developed through the lens of the new PRIZM that we're delivering today. And as you can see, similarly to what we saw in Doug's presentation, even though they have a similar level of social vulnerability, there's different different lifestyle groups and different levels of socioeconomic status that are covered in different ways in this vulnerability index. We also can put these indices on the map, and we can look at the extent to which people are leaving their homes by the new PRIZM segmentation system as well. So even though the average proportion of the population that was leaving their house by going more than 100 meters away on the Victoria Day weekend, just last weekend, was 23%, we can see for these 6 examples, some that were above and some that were below average. These are the kinds of data that are going to be very helpful in understanding what kind of policies need to be implemented, what kind of hours retail outlets should be open for, and really where people are going to change behavior and where the new behaviors of moving more quickly to online banking, shopping online, whether people are going to continue eating out or not. We're going to be able to look at those in more near real time through looking at the anonymous aggregate mobile phone data and combining it with the new PRIZM. And we're going to produce weekly monitoring reports so that we'll be able to help people understand how to support getting Canada on track to economic recovery, but also doing it by understanding the different subsets of the population and doing it in a safe way. That's why we're so pleased that we did make the decision to build a new PRIZM so that it's up to date to 2020 with all the latest kind of level set data. And now we can look at the changes and habits and behavior through the lens of this new PRIZM as we all move forward to a different kind of out and about environment. Of course, the existing system will run parallel, and our teams will work with our clients to understand the transition timing. There'll be some applications where it makes perfectly good sense to continue with the PRIZM system that you have. But depending on your business challenge and your strategy, we'll work together with you to move to, we'll work with you to move to a new implementation at the right time. And we run both systems for the next while, both in terms of your envision systems and what you're able to work with in terms of project work. The data will be available next week, and that will be both in our systems and for project work and for the licensees who take it in-house. And we'll also be launching next week a new tool that will allow you to look up PRIZM segments. This will be a great conversation starter for your virtual cocktail parties, but it'll also be something that you can use to socialize the new PRIZM across your enterprise. So this is the app that's going to be available for download for both Android and Apple phones. You'll put in your PRIZM segment. You'll be able to, you put in your postal code, and you'll be able to see the PRIZM segment that you're a part of. Then you'll be able to see where that segment exists, whether it's something that's concentrated in one area or another. You'll be able to pan and zoom around the map and actually see where that postal code is. And then we'll be showing you the highlights that used to be in our manuals, but are now going to be available and online, showing who these groups are, how they think, and how they live. So that's a very exciting new launch. Again, you'll be able to watch for it next Wednesday so that you can have PRIZM at your fingertips and show other people based on their postal code what PRIZM segment they belong to. So I thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it back to Evan, who's going to moderate any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Jan. So we do have a number of questions and that have come in, so I'll go through those. But just before I address the questions, I just want to reinforce that the presentation will be made available on our website within the next couple of days. And as Jan mentioned, the data release for PRIZM happens on May 27th, and you will have all the product literature associated with new PRIZM available at that time. There is some information on our website currently, but the full panoply of marketing materials will be available to you at that point. So the first question that comes up is, how accurately does the new version of PRIZM depict neighborhoods in small towns such as Fort McMurray or small rural communities?
So Danny, are you going to take that?
Sure. So Fort McMurray, I looked it up. I had the time now to take a look. Fort McMurray actually has 27 different segments in it. The top 3 segments are suburban sports, segment 25, juggling acts, segment 57, and all-terrain families, segment 24. And these comprise about 50% of Fort McMurray itself. So what you're going to find is, like with the existing PRIZM, the new PRIZM has a very good descriptor for small towns, rural areas, suburban areas that capture the small town life, as well as the various neighborhoods that people have, basically the neighborhoods that have emerged as a result of family formation, and in the case of Fort McMurray, people moving in and around. So there's actually quite a bit of variety out there, and the new PRIZM, rest assured, does a very good job of describing those neighborhoods.
Thank you, Danny. So another question that came up was, someone says that they heard that the PRIZM is based on the demographic data from the 2016 census. So why did it take so long for PRIZM to be released?
I think that's back to you, Danny.
Yeah, no problem. So the 2016 census, while done in 2016, doesn't fully come out until late 2017, early 2018. It takes that long for Statistics Canada to gather the data and process it, and finally publicize and release the data at the dissemination area level. We then take those data and we further model it to fill in some of the gaps that are there. And the gaps come as a result of some random rounding and suppression that Statistics Canada puts into the census to maintain confidentiality. As well, we try to overcome the census undercount. Not everyone does respond to the census questionnaire, and so we take those numbers from 2016 and we adjust to reflect the undercount. That process alone takes us about 7 to 8 months. And it's only at that point that we can begin to evaluate the effectiveness of the old PRIZM with the new census and see how consistent it is. And so that took us a little while as well. And so then we undertook we made a decision that it was time to update the census, given the quality of the census and the NHS from 2011. And of course, the process for creating PRIZM is a long one, gathering the data, running the different solutions. And then, of course, once that part is done, the naming and personifying of all the segments. And that process alone took just over a year. So it takes us, unfortunately, that amount of time to process and release a new segmentation system.
Thank you, Danny. Another question, can you please elaborate how you integrate insights with digital channels, such as Google?
So when our customers work with us and define custom audiences through some extensive work like their own internal segments, their data, and define custom segments that have PRIZM embedded, then we can link those target audiences that they want to communicate with back to geography, and then we can go to the Google ad tech world and have those ads targeted based on the geographic areas using the forward sortation areas, and those ads can be targeted to just those groups. The data that we provide narrow the audience down geographically, but then it can also be layered with data that's in the other ecosystems so that the targeting can be further refined.
Great, thanks. Another question. Most of the clients I work with are in the not-for-profit sector. Will these segments identify those neighborhoods with a higher propensity to be donors or who can contribute to fundraising?
Absolutely. We have a survey or a product called Giving Back. It's based on the Statistics Canada survey of giving, volunteering, and participating. And it has a huge section on donations, types of organizations that people donate to, how people choose to volunteer their time. These same types of questions can be found in some of our other survey products as well from Fubidot and Numeris. So we actually have that well covered.
Excellent. So I think this might be another one for you, Danny. Can you give an example of a neighborhood that is in the new urban fringe?
Sure. So I did show some maps earlier of where the urban fringe can be found. And in Toronto, that's where we live. big parts of Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke are all urban fringe. When we get to Vancouver, there are neighborhoods like Kerrisdale and Hastings Sunrise in Vancouver, and portions of Burnaby and New Westminster are also on the urban fringe. If we go to Calgary, there are select neighborhoods on the periphery, such as Arbor Lake in Tuscany in the northwest, and Panorama Hills in the north, and Pine Ridge in the east that are urban fringe. And in Montreal, starting with Dorval, west of downtown, and going around through Pointe Claire into Laval, and across to St. Leonard into Boucherville, these are all urban fringe neighborhoods.
Great. So there are a number of questions that relate to the old PRIZM and the new PRIZM and how that transition is happening and how those segments are linked. And these are coming from clients who have done some segmentation projects. Janet, do you want to just highlight again the transition process that we're undertaking with clients in various degrees?
For sure. I mean, we've as we've really built a new schema 4 times since the beginning of the company, and then even in our previous lives, it's a process that has to be done carefully for customers who are working with the existing system, the previous system, I should say, and are wanting to redefine those segments in terms of the new system. The account teams will be working together with you to look at the what a walkover or a revision process would look like, and really to be completely transparent how recently those segments were developed and what they were based on, and what the use case is, what the purpose is, will determine whether they can be revised. And there's not a one-to-one walkover when we redesign these, but at the target group or the custom audience level, we can have techniques to make the transition. So we'll be working with you on a case-by-case basis and providing you with guidance and also time and insight into what it means for the specific work you've done. We've already started to have our insights team look at the segments that have been developed in about 150 cases in the past while, so that we're ready to answer your questions, provide you with our analysis, and make sure that that transition takes place at the right time in a way that's as seamless as possible for you and helps you use your existing investment as well as migrating it to your future plans as effectively as possible.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, we have time for about one more question before we're going to hit the 1 hour mark. So I think there are a number of questions that have come in. I think you piqued people's interests with the out and about capabilities using the mobile movement data and being able to look at some of that through the PRIZM lens. So is that something that people who are already subscribed to Mobilescapes can run themselves? And related to that, in terms of the weekly monitoring reports, are those going to be provided next week? Or are those going to be provided by email? There's a couple of questions in that vein.
So just to be perfectly clear, the weekly monitoring using out and about data is going to be a new product line. Hopefully we'll have some glimpses at a high level that will be available to our existing clients within the next few weeks. But no, they won't be provided next week. We're going to start releasing those in June, and they're going to be based on pretty significant value-added work on top of our mobile movement data. So the question that we're asking when we look at out and about is, who has gone more than 100 meters from their home? As the social distancing stays in place, but the stay-at-home restrictions are eased, we'll be looking at who's going where, how long they stay out, how far they go, and other questions like that. And we'll be providing those summaries at the dissemination area level and for aggregation and for use in Envision and for use in projects, so that they will be tied in for Mobilescapes users and Envision users who are using the platform, but they will also be available to people who aren't on the platform. These products are in early development. We started them about 3 weeks ago. We have about 50 people working on different aspects of the specific out and about products, of course, led by the R&D team, which has been producing those measures of leaving the house and activities that have been featured in many press articles and blogs and so on that we've been posting. But you should really talk with your account people about the availability and the timing. And also we're going to be looking at some dashboards in order to make some top line learnings from those data available. I think it's really important that we look at week by week the activity of consumers and citizens compared to the same week last year, and look at how things are changing by geography and by PRIZM segment. So
Thank you, Jan.
The one other thing I wanted to say is that PRIZM lookup that I showed you is a microsite, and we will be providing to everyone who has joined this event today with the instructions of how to access that microsite and download it as soon as it's released next week. And that will enable you to look at your postal code and see your new PRIZM segment that way.
That's great. Thank you, Jan. So we are at the time limit for this presentation. I know there are a number of other questions that we weren't able to get to today. However, we will be following up on those questions individually. And on our website, you can also find a frequently asked question list on the PRIZM page. And we will continue to add to that and hopefully address all those questions that you have. Certainly, it seems like we've piqued people's interest. We hope you're as excited about PRIZM and its new rebuilt version as we are. And we thank you for joining our presentation today. We look forward to further communications and connecting with you in the near future. Thanks very much.